Now, you may have heard or read somewhere, Facebook is bad. It seems a bit obvious, right? At this point in time, I think most of us started thinking about how bad Facebook was after November 2016. Wonder what happened in November 2016. I had been thinking about it for quite some time. Before that, I had been immersed in the scholarship on social media and digital media, since there was such a thing as social media and digital media. And I had been collecting notes for some time about the variety of potential harms and challenges and costs and benefits of ubiquitous connectivity, ubiquitous surveillance, and ubiquitous attention grabbing, right? You have all these interesting dynamics going on through these devices, right? These devices we all now have in our pockets and our purses and attached to our bodies. It's a very strange thing that we've done to ourselves, with ourselves, and again, a really short period of time. Let me just tilt these up a little bit. So I was trying to make sense of that. I was trying to make sense of that before the debacle of November 2016. Some call it an election. I merely refer to it as a debacle. But when that happened, I felt a certain urgency. Now, you have probably read and you probably understand that there are certain acute problems with what flows on Facebook. You've probably paid a lot of attention to the fact that Facebook is a breeding ground for QAnon and other dangerous conspiracy theories, that it's a source of anti-vaccine propaganda and thus severely restricting our ability to handle the current health crises around the world. You've probably read about the ways that Russian agents have infiltrated Facebook, set up fake groups, and distracted or misinformed Americans and further divided us, if that were at all possible. All of that's true, but it's not the story. It's not the whole story. It's not the big story. The whole story, the big story, is actually much more dangerous than any of that. And it's dangerous in a way that I'm comforted to say this audience will get, but most of my audiences don't get. This audience will understand deeply because of the habits of thought that you've developed over all these years, immersed in general semantics, immersed in media ecology. When I make the arguments I'm about to make to most audiences, they glaze over and they want to focus on the item, the content, the message. They don't want to focus on the overall effect of not just Facebook, but its large role in our media ecosystem and the ways in which it's distorting our understanding of the world, it's distorting our understanding of each other, our relationships with each other, our judgments about each other. How is it undermining democracy? I'll give away the end. It's undermining democracy by limiting our ability to think clearly, collectively, right? We've heard and read many things. Sherry Turkle, I'm sure, talked about this when she gave this lecture, about the ways that we are personally impeded by these instruments of constant distraction, these weapons of mass distraction, by how we are constantly pulled out of ourselves, how we're tricked and seduced into the shallowest of activities. I'm not here to dispute that or endorse that, but I want to raise a different issue. That collectively, as citizens in a democratic republic, we are now seemingly incapable of confronting our problems like grown-ups. I'm so glad that Lance introduced this evening as he did. We didn't talk about it before, but we basically were heading in the same direction. All right, let me tell you a few things about Facebook just to set this whole thing up. Facebook while founded in the United States of America, while chartered in the United States of America, incorporated in the United States of America, is not America. It's not American. It's global. It is the most pervasive and influential global media system in human history. That's remarkable if you consider how young it is. Facebook was established in 2004 in a dorm room in Harvard University. Harvard has so much to answer for in so many areas of life, this being just one. 2004, yesterday. Apologies to the students in the back of the room who don't think it was yesterday, but the rest of us know it was just yesterday when it was founded, right? And yet, in that very short period of time, it has touched the world. It has, from Mark Zuckerberg's point of view, united the world. It has linked the world. I think it's divided the world in a very interesting way, in a way that Mark Zuckerberg never could have anticipated and still does not acknowledge. We should, however, acknowledge that if you look at this map of Facebook connectivity, a bit out of date, you might notice that there's a huge dark spot where the People's Republic of China sits. China is basically the only part of the world where Facebook does not matter. There are reasons behind that. We can talk about it later. But if you take China out of the system, we are talking about one company that has constant, pervasive influence on a significant fraction of the world's population. And by that, I mean a significant portion of the world's population has outsourced judgment about their social connections, about what they consider important or true or beautiful in life. That's a stunning thing to consider. Now, it seems so innocent, right? Why did we all sign up for Facebook? Well, it was for the baby pictures and the puppy pictures. It was to keep in touch with your cousin and then your cousin's kid when your cousin's kid graduated from high school. That's the good stuff in life. That's the stuff that Facebook does for us with limited effort. Remember how much effort it took to even remember your cousin's kid's name? Right? Now it just appears to you. You just pick up your phone, you open up your computer, and oh, that's my cousin's kid's name. Yes. Oh, congratulations. I'll send a Parker pen set, and even though nobody uses pens anymore. So, right. But and again, that's the good stuff, right? That's the good stuff, is it keeps us in touch with people we love, people we kind of love, people we used to love, people we really don't want to admit we ever loved, but nonetheless. And by the way, an interesting part of this that is one of the big challenges and subjects for research is the extent to which Facebook scrambles all of those contexts, scrambles all of those forms of relationship that we used to keep distinct in our lives, our work friends, small f, not capital, right? Capital F is what Facebook claims it manages. From our social friends, our childhood friends, from our college friends from our adult friends, our current lovers from our former lovers. We used to be able to segregate these people extremely well. Not so much anymore. All those contexts are scrambled, and it's created a sense of dizziness, social dizziness, where it's just so much, it takes so much effort to even manage one's reputation among these various spheres. And by the way, this is the real privacy crisis of Facebook. It's not something I had intended on talking about deeply. We can talk about it later if you'd like. Now, here's the core argument of my book. But I want you to not think about this in terms of, again, the content. Don't think about the propaganda as the problem. The propaganda system is the problem. And how does it promote nationalism and authoritarianism? Well, not directly. It does so in a much more insidious way. As I said, it undermines our ability to think collectively about the most crucial issues of our day. Now, I want to point out that Facebook is not the only problem in this system. It is not the only villain in this story, but it is the biggest, the richest, and the most pervasive, and it has affected or twisted or distorted or remodeled or re-engineered every single element of our media ecosystem. Now, this is one of many, what you might call mission statements that Mark Zuckerberg has issued over the years. I picked this one. I think it covers the most ground. Every couple of years, he has to sort of re-examine or represent Facebook and remind people about what it's all about and what it's supposed to do and why it's valuable and how it makes our lives better. And by the way, Mark Zuckerberg truly and deeply believes that if there's a problem with Facebook, it's that not enough of us are on it, and not enough of us who are on it spend enough. What's good for the world is good for Facebook, and what is good for Facebook is good for the world. And if we all lived through Facebook in more ways, for more time, with more commitment, we would treat each other better, we would be smarter, food would taste better, dogs and cats would get along, lovely, lovely stuff would flow if we would only spend more time on Facebook. He truly believes this. I can say this with some confidence because I spent way too much time reading everything he's ever written and everything he's ever said, at least published publicly. And I tried to distill from that his beliefs, his motivations. He's a terrible liar, as you've probably seen on a number of occasions when he's tried to lie, but he tends to tell the truth, even if inadvertently. And the truth is, he believes this, that connecting people is an unadulterated good, that it never, ever, ever has negative externalities. He truly believes that we can get over our problems if we would just be honest with each other, open with each other, true to each other, authentic to each other. He believes that the root of bigotry, the roots of fear, and the roots of hatred come from distance. And by forging connectivity, sometimes forcing connectivity, we can overcome that and we will all get along, thus ignoring basically all of human history, right? It's not as if neighbors have never started slaughtering each other. It's not as if family members have not done great damage to each other. Familiarity, connection, is not a salve. It's not a solution. It's not a way to rise above. We all know, because we've all lived a while and read a lot, that it takes a lot more than that to get human beings to get along. Mark Zuckerberg started this company when he was very young and deeply uneducated. And that was my conclusion about him, that he's idealistic and profoundly uneducated, right? Frighteningly uneducated. He seems to ignore all of human history. He seems to ignore the variety of human cruelties because he built a system designed for animals who carry no sense of cruelty, who carry no sense of bitterness or prejudice. And believe me, if we were that good, Facebook would be just fine. It really would be all baby pictures and puppy pictures. But we know that it is not. Okay, let me talk about what Facebook is. It is, as I said, the most pervasive media system in the history of the world. This is, and I'm sorry, the top is cut off on this screen. It says most popular social networks worldwide as of July 2021, ranked by number of active monthly users in millions. What that number is on the right side of the Facebook bar is 2.853 billion users. By January, it will most certainly hit 3 billion users. 3 billion human beings are regular users of Facebook. There are only 7.6 billion humans on Earth. 3 billion of them by January will be regular Facebook users. And he hasn't even entered China. Okay, 3 billion people. We've never seen anything like this. Oh, how the BBC would love to have 3 billion listeners, right? How CNN would love to have 3 billion viewers, or the Wall Street Journal to have 3 billion readers. Nothing ever has reached this level of influence.
They're all real?
Yes, actually, yeah, almost all of them are. There's a story behind that I can tell you later. But yes, they certainly are. There's a certain churn to the fake users, but it's a pretty constant number. Now, this is also growing. This number is growing at an alarming rate. Well, it's a really optimistic rate if you work for Facebook or you own Facebook stock, which, as you might guess, I do not. And I'm not bitter. But look, 2 years ago, that number was just over 2 billion. It's going to hit 3 billion by January. And where is the growth? The growth is where the growth in human beings is. The growth is in sub-Saharan Africa. The growth is in Latin America. The growth is in Southeast Asia. We've pretty much topped out here in North America. About 86% of Americans are regular Facebook users. It's dipped a little bit. We've shaved off a little bit in the last couple of years, but it's pretty much holding steady, and that's true of Canada as well. I don't think that Facebook sees any growth in the US market or in the Western European market, certainly not the Canadian market. The growth is elsewhere. By the way, this is revenue. Oh, wait, there's a couple things I need to say about this previous slide. Sorry. So look at the top companies. YouTube is number 2 with 2.91 billion, so almost 2.3 billion users. Now, I am not convinced that YouTube should necessarily be on this list because it doesn't actually do the social thing for most people. There are social aspects to the way it's designed and the way people use it, but it's not central to its activity. It does compete with Facebook for advertising revenue and competes for Facebook for our attention, right? Eyeballs over time. But it is not really in the same business as Facebook. Well, okay, literally it's in the same business because it's advertising, but it doesn't perform for us the same role in our lives, that sense of communication and connectivity, right, that Facebook is so good at. Now, what else is up there that does that? Well, let's look at the next 3 companies. WhatsApp at 2 billion users, Instagram at 1.4 billion users, Facebook Messenger at 1.3 billion users. That means if you took YouTube out and said it's not social media, then the top four social media companies in the world or platforms in the world are all owned by Facebook. There's nothing else but Facebook. Now, often we are told to pay attention to Twitter, or we're told to pay attention to Snapchat, or we're told to pay attention to, Reddit or Pinterest. Those are trivial, largely meaningless. Why do we pay attention to these other things so much? Well, because they're there, and when reporters talk about them, especially in the business pages, they don't necessarily put it in scale. They don't necessarily think about it's the relative effect on the world that these companies have. But let me point out that Twitter, at 397 million users, is way down at the bottom, below Reddit. 397 million users. By the way, it was 330 million users about 4 years ago. Its rate of growth is actually quite slim. It has pretty much topped out. Much of that extra 60 million came during the Trump years, just because Twitter got a bit more interesting during those years, but it has not grown in the last year. Not only that, Twitter's never made a dime. Twitter's essentially been for sale for 6 or 7 years, and no major, larger, richer companies want to buy it. It's a hassle. It's a huge risk, and it doesn't have a payoff, nor does it have a strong revenue model. It doesn't track everything we do the way Facebook does. It doesn't have a way of positioning ads as effectively as Facebook does. It might not even stick around very much longer. It's still burning through venture capital money. So I don't make much of Twitter. Now, in my field of social media research, Almost all of the research done is Twitter-based. And often it'll be presented as generalizing about social media, as if Twitter is anything like Facebook. And Twitter does not work like Facebook. It does not have the same back-end structure. It doesn't have the same algorithmic function. It doesn't, again, perform the same work in the world as Facebook, nor is it as pervasive, nor is it as interesting. Ultimately, it's why I didn't write a book about Twitter, and I probably never will. But Facebook is everything. Now, again, this is stunning. We should not lose sight of this. And I try to tell my students, and I try to tell all my audiences, try to wrap your minds around 3 billion people using one service. What are there, 1.3 billion Muslims in the world? Something like that. 3 billion Facebook users. And growing. All right? By the way, the next one on the list is WeChat, the largest social media service in China. And most of the next few companies are all Chinese companies or Chinese-owned companies, like TikTok is owned by a Chinese company. And so we're basically talking the next rung of this ladder, or sets of rungs of this ladder, are all operating in China, competing for attention in China. Only TikTok really gets beyond China, although WeChat is starting to get beyond China quite a bit in the areas of, for instance, the diaspora, but also it's starting to work its way into places like Australia and Singapore and so forth. It is something to watch. It is what Mark Zuckerberg wakes up every day and thinks about. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't think about Twitter. He doesn't think about TikTok. Well, he kind of does think about TikTok now. What he really thinks, he doesn't think about Snapchat anymore. He's pretty much stifled the growth of Snapchat. But what he really thinks about is WeChat. He wishes he were WeChat. And I'll explain that when I get to the conclusion. Again, here's the revenue, just to give you a sense of just how wealthy this company is. It is one of the 5 wealthiest companies in the world, and therefore one of the 5 wealthiest companies in the history of the world, because we've never had companies worth $1 trillion before, and Apple and Amazon have both at various times topped that in recent months. But basically, this is the revenue of Facebook and Instagram, and everything else is tiny. Yeah, so you can also imagine that money, that's money that's not going to the local newspaper in Des Moines, Iowa. That's money that's not going to the local newspaper in Kyiv, Ukraine. That's money that's not going to a radio station in Bogota, Colombia. Right? Advertising money is gravitating to Facebook and its properties and Google, and they are becoming a duopoly, sucking up all the advertising money that's out there because they do it better. It's a rational choice. If you are an advertiser, if you're a company that's trying to attract attention and build market share, you would be a fool not to use Facebook and Twitter because they get your ads right in front of the people you want. This, by the way, is the, you can't see the top of it. Again, I apologize. This is the countries in which Facebook has the largest share, the largest penetration. And you can see that the future of Facebook is not India. The present of Facebook is India. India has 340 million Facebook users in it. Let me remind you that India has 1.2 billion adult humans and plenty of younger humans as well, ready to be adults. The potential for growth in India is stunning. So basically only a third of India is now using Facebook, but the growth rate there is pretty outstanding. Mark Zuckerberg wakes up every day, and while he thinks about WeChat as a competitor and a model for what he would like Facebook to be, he thinks about India as his market. We are an afterthought to him, except that we make the most noise for him. It's really all about India. It's about Indonesia. It's about Brazil. It's about Mexico, the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Egypt, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Colombia. In places like Bangladesh, in places like Pakistan, in places like Sri Lanka, in places like Myanmar, Facebook is so much more important to people's lives than it is in the United States. While we have a pretty high level of market penetration, 86% of adults using Facebook, the importance that Facebook plays in our lives is much lower than in many other parts of the world. Why? Because we have a diverse and mature media system in this country. We have options. You can live very well without Facebook. If you're in Sri Lanka, if you're in Pakistan, if you're in Myanmar, you cannot live without Facebook. You depend on it. Facebook is how you deal with the state. It's how you find your relatives. It is how you do business. And this is increasingly true in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Nigeria, in South Africa as well. It's increasingly true in Mexico. It's increasingly true in the Philippines. It's increasingly true in Indonesia, one of the largest countries in the world. Every day, Facebook becomes more and more important in people's lives just to get through the day. It's a complicated set of reasons. It has to do with the fact that much of the communicative infrastructure in those countries was largely insufficient, did not meet needs and demands for so many decades of the 20th century, right? But now that there's this ability to make direct communicative connections among people at no marginal cost across the globe and very low upfront cost, it becomes necessary. It becomes something upon which entire societies and economies and families are dependent. There's no going back on that, right? So if you think that one of the proper responses to Facebook's maladies or problems in the world is for you to stop using Facebook, I can promise you that Mark Zuckerberg does not care about you and whether you use Facebook, because in the time it took for me to introduce that idea to you, 100 people in Brazil just signed up for Facebook. That's where the future is. Now, the United States is still the largest source of revenue for Facebook because the dollar is the base currency of the world, right? The currency that matters, it's strong, and we tend to click on ads more than most people because we have more disposable cash than most people, and we have credit cards more than most people. So it's so much easier for us to do web-based commerce than it is in much of the world where people don't have credit cards or other forms of digital transactions. But that's not going to be the case for long. So what does Facebook actually do? It does three things. Well, there are three aspects to Facebook I would like you to remember or think about. Because it's not just a website, right? It's not just a blog. It's not just a place to post things and have them maybe get seen by some people. Facebook is a surveillance machine. It watches everything you do. If you have any Facebook company apps on your phone, it knows where you are at all times. It also knows who's around you at all times. So I assume that, let's assume half the people in this room have some sort of Facebook app on their phone, a WhatsApp, an Instagram, Facebook Messenger, or Facebook. If you have it on your phone, there's a really good chance that you haven't flipped the settings to the point where it doesn't follow you where you are. And given that the other people in this room have the same settings, Facebook now knows who you're hanging out with. Does it care? Really, not so much, but mathematically it does, because that feeds into data, behavioral data over time. What it does know about you is you're likely to show up in a room like this, on a night like this, in a zip code like this. It knows that you're the sort of person who, because through other means, it knows you're the sort of person who buys the kind of car you have, or subscribes to the magazines to which you subscribe. Facebook knows your politics. It knows your sexual orientation. It knows your gender. It knows your religion. And it doesn't know this directly unless you have signed up for a group, a Facebook group, for your affiliations, and millions of people are gladly doing that. It knows these things because of where you show up on a Saturday, or where you show up on a Friday, or where you show up on a Sunday. That's just one way to figure out your religion. Unless you're Hindu like me, then it's a whole other complicated thing. But they have their ways, right? Okay, so what else does Facebook do besides surveillance? That was just location, by the way. What else does Facebook do besides surveillance? It does advertising really well. As I said before, it places what it calls relevant ads on your news feed constantly, ads that reflect what you have expressed interest in or what Facebook guesses you will have an interest in based on other people very much like you. Facebook is constantly assembling doppelgangers, assembling a cast of Facebook users who are a lot like you, even though you've probably never met them. Facebook knows hundreds of people who have your politics and have your sexual orientation and have your income level and have your education level and have your interest in general semantics. You know, that may just be the people in this room, but still, it's got that and it tracks that. And what that means is Facebook then bases its judgments and predictions on what you might want to buy based on what those people have already bought. That's how it seems to be one step ahead of you. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize I wanted those shoes. I didn't realize I needed that, whatever it is, that gizmo that I can't even think of right now. I thought I had a witty gizmo in the front of my mind, but it slipped me, right? So Facebook does this because somebody else who's very much like you purchased this thing 48 hours ago. And then it spreads the ad to people like that person, and you're one of those people. And it's very contextual and it's very fluid and it might change. Your cast of doppelgangers might be different 7 days from now, right? But it tags you in all these different ways. And it has deep memory, right? Because it has more than a decade of data of your interaction with Facebook and all those people like you. It's pretty powerful. So look, this is the magic. You watch Mad Men and you know it's all a leap of faith, right? Don Draper sitting up there telling stories, spinning tales, making promises. He's a preacher. He's not a data analyst. He's making it all up. He gets lucky because he has the Lucky Strike contract and it happens to be an extremely addictive product. And lo and behold, everyone's buying Lucky Strikes. But, you know, he gets lucky. These days, advertisers don't have to be lucky. They don't have to waste money on people who don't want ostrich skin cowboy boots. Oh man, if you want ostrich skin cowboy boots, the ostrich skin cowboy boots will find you. By the way, it cost about $450 to $600. And not a lot of people are into them, but if you're into them, you're into them, right? And how do they find you? Well, because people like you who've been interested in the same sports teams and foods and politics and music also bought ostrich skin cowboy boots, and they probably have your income level and they probably have indicated a propensity. And oh my gosh, I didn't realize how much I wanted ostrich skin cowboy boots. So if every market is essentially a niche market these days, there are very few mass markets, with the exception of soft drinks, beer, tobacco, pickup trucks, right? Everything else is a niche market. Well, Facebook and Google, because they do the same kind of work, are ideal for this. You do not waste money anymore. You do not put your ads in front of people who won't care about your product. That is stunning. And what's the third thing? So we've got surveillance, pervasive surveillance. We've got stunningly effective advertising, and we have algorithmic amplification. That's the third thing. All that data that they collect on you, that is to place ads, but it's also to keep you hooked on Facebook. It's also to place things into your newsfeed that are going to interest you, mostly by sparking your emotions. Facebook is not interested in the fact claims expressed in a post. It doesn't even have a way of reading them. Facebook is not interested in the politics of a particular post or in the subject of a particular post so much. It's interested in the potential for reaction, for engagement. How does Facebook measure this or spark this or encourage this? Through likes, through shares, right? You share it to your page if you see it on somebody else's, through comments. Those are the major ways: likes, shares, and comments. And if you like something, if you share something, if you comment on something, you're telling Facebook this is interesting. If a lot of people like it or share it or comment on it, then Facebook's algorithms kick it up even higher and put this piece of content on more news feeds around the world. What does this mean? What travels well on Facebook? Anything that generates strong emotions. If you post something that is well measured, like balanced, thought out well, carefully crafted, deeply researched? No chance. That sinks like a stone on Facebook. No chance. Like if you were to go to the Economist website and pick up its latest story on European Union monetary policy, it affects millions of people. This is kind of an important thing. And the way the Economist writes, kind of droll, sort of witty, but nobody gets angry at the Economist, right? Nobody gets happy reading the Economist. You're just learning. I mean, you might disagree or agree, but you're not going to get all passionate about it. It's the Economist, right? So you post that on your site, nobody's going to care, right? Maybe Tom will comment on it and we'll say, like, that's about it. And that's nice, right? Maybe one or two comments, right? The real, economics nerds in your friend group will be into it. But if you were to go home tonight and post an anti-vaccine screed or an anti-Semitic screed, right? Well, let's say an anti-vaccine screed, right? Let's say I do it just for the sake of argument, right? I post an anti-vaccine screed tonight. What's going to happen? Well, I have a few Facebook friends in this room, Tom and Lance and Mike, right? And they're going to say, whoa, dude, what are you talking about? This stuff is just not right. You're way off, right? Brian's going to pipe in and say, man, I've got some stuff you need to read. Here's some pages from the Centers for Disease Control. Here's some news stories from reputable sources. You really need to educate yourself better about this. And you know what? If we were all sitting around a table and we've had a little bit too much to drink and I say something stupid like that, that would be what my friends and colleagues would do. That's what we are trained to do to each other, right? Someone says something off or something you disagree with or something unfounded, you correct them. You provide better information. You push back. That's what we do as citizens in the democratic republic. We're free to do it and we have a responsibility to do it. And we're used to doing it and we're trained to do it. But on Facebook, it's the worst thing you can do. If I post that on my page and like Mike starts talking about how I'm totally off base, and then Brian follows up, and then Lance follows up, and then Tom gets sick of me being defensive. And Tom then takes my post and puts it on his and says, can you believe this idiot? He's a professor at the University of Virginia and he doesn't know anything. Whoa, now it's going to go completely crazy. Now he shared it to his own page after all these comments. Facebook's algorithms, not knowing or caring what I'm writing about, think, oh my gosh, this is hot. Let's amplify it. Algorithmic amplification. So again, what moves on Facebook? Things that spark strong emotions. Puppy pictures, baby pictures, hate speech, conspiracies, nonsense. Either it's going to make you super happy or it's going to make you super mad. What this means is that arguing with the crazy on Facebook is thoroughly counterproductive. You cannot win. You encourage distribution by arguing with the crazy on Facebook. And yet we do it. We can't help it because that's what we're supposed to do, we think. It's so perverse. It's so upside down. That's why I say the problem with Facebook is Facebook. You can't use our normal strategies to address the maladies of Facebook, because the maladies of Facebook are not just that there's stupid stuff on Facebook or that lots of the 3 billion people who use Facebook are not that smart or not that good. That's humanity, people. That's always been the case. That's never going to not be the case. Well, I don't want to be that gloomy. It's not going to be that case anytime soon, right? It's not going to be the case anytime soon. The problem with Facebook is Facebook because those 3 things, the surveillance, the advertising system, and the algorithmic amplification are deeply embedded in Facebook such that they are what made Facebook Facebook. And if any proposal to reform Facebook does not directly address one or more of those 3 things, it is superficial, it is cosmetic. And so far in this country, all we have been talking about is the superficial and cosmetic. And that's not to say that the superficial and the cosmetic are irrelevant. I would love it if Facebook would somehow be able to scrub itself of anti-vaccine information or QAnon propaganda that nearly resulted in the death of the vice president of the United States on January 6th. I would love if that were the case, if Facebook had the ability to police itself like this. It does not. It's too big to govern. It's too big to fix. And it has these three aspects from day one that basically make reform impossible. I'm such a bringer of gloom, and I'm sorry about that. But okay, this is what we tend to focus on: the nonsense, the propaganda, the content, the stuff that irks us, the stuff we worry about. But this is an example of my Facebook page just taken this afternoon. And I want you not to pay attention to the content. It is a cute puppy. And that's Lucinda Williams, a fine artist. But let's not pay attention to what is in the content. I want you to think about the design, the overall experience. And I wish I could have replicated for you the flow, the experience of actually using Facebook, which you probably have used, so you probably know what I'm talking about. From this point, it's time to scroll. It's time to move up. It's time to move up. It's time to move up. It's time to see more and more images. Here's what people don't seem to grasp about Facebook. It is a visual medium first and foremost. It's a visual medium. It is about images. Even the headlines are essentially, I'm sorry, that's actually St. Vincent. That's not Lucinda Williams. But she's on Austin City Limits, so I was confused. Lucinda Williams is often on us. Okay, so but the process, the experience of using Facebook is to have a constant flow of images and abrupt words. There's no depth to the experience. There might be depth if you click on one of the links and you go to another page and you read that article from The Economist, but you're not going to do that. You might even comment about it without reading it. Most people do, right? But the experience is visual. The experience is visual. It is really about images. Again, even the words come in visual form. They hit you all at once. They're not meant to be digested. And so what is interesting about the semantic analysis of Facebook is it should be focused on the entire visual experience. This pops up on my newsfeed every year on the same day, on the anniversary of the day that we got this lovely puppy named Butter, who unfortunately passed away 2 weeks ago. So this makes me sad. She was an amazing dog, a super dog. And she had a lot of friends and fans, including some in this room, who have issued lovely condolences for her passing. But this is the day we got her, and yeah, she was pretty amazing. Now, this is one of the best days of my life. And it's also one of the cutest photos that's ever appeared on my Facebook page. I love the awe reaction that I got in here. I get it all the time, right? And it's a lovely tribute to Butter, who remained this beautiful her entire life. Now, what happens is every time this shows up on my Facebook page is it gets hundreds of likes. This is the puppy picture that makes Facebook all worth it, right? And it's a perfect example of what the Facebook experience is supposed to be and is often, but is not in totality. Now, I'm going to read a bit of my book here because I made reference to Susan Sontag's work, and I think it's kind of relevant to what we're talking about here. The overall experience of the Facebook newsfeed is, regardless of the type of content rendered, a series of photographs. Even the video clips that begin playing without sound seem more like still images as the viewer scrolls past them. Large photographs anchor the newspaper articles, such that the headline of the article serves more as a caption for the photo than an introduction to a long collection of sentences. Links to text either fail to grab one's attention or serve only as a photograph of text, more like a billboard than an article. That the Facebook newsfeed acts like a scroll of famed photographs means that we are limited in our ability to generate deep understanding of the content as it sits on our feed. If we clicked on a story because the image and the caption intrigue us, we could gain insight, knowledge, appreciation, and understanding, but how often do we click and on which items? If we click on none of the items on our newsfeed, a common occurrence, then we experience only this flow of images. The images spark feelings, both positive and negative. They spark comments and reactions. More than 40 years ago, Susan Sontag described the effect photographs have on our ability to make sense of the world. She used language that almost perfectly describes the problem with Facebook. Photographs have an almost innate claim to represent reality objectively and truthfully. The frequent Facebook comment, "Picture it didn't happen," shows that photography, even in the age of Photoshop editing and Snapchat filters and animations, still carries the power of documentation. Photography collapses any ambiguity of fact claims, questions of context, or helpful framing of a dispute. Every photograph is necessarily and almost by definition out of context. Photographs carry no moral claims. They make no arguments. They don't compare and contrast. They don't by themselves deliver plots or tell stories, but they do tug at our deepest sympathies, regardless of the messiness of the world outside the frame. Photographs do odd work over space and time. They bring what happened just then, maybe perhaps yesterday, perhaps in 1914, into our present, leaving us to deal with the image in our own frameworks of judgment and relevance. When photographs scroll across your field of vision as you work your way through your Facebook newsfeed, they become, in the words of art historian John Berger, advertisements for themselves. Decontextualized, or rather recontextualized as part of a Facebook newsfeed, photographs that once carried significant emotional power lose it as well. Major works of photography can become just symbols of their former power, referring to how they once mattered and now only matter to and through Facebook. When in 2016, Facebook removed a post from a Facebook site of a Norwegian newspaper, Aftenposten, that included one of the most famous images of the 20th century, a naked Vietnamese girl running and crying in pain because she had just been sprayed with napalm, it received widespread criticism for its clumsy methods of choosing what counts as indecent and worthy of deletion. In other words, Facebook's algorithms, which scan for human nudity, removed this image from a newspaper site. The image captured by photographer Nick Oat of the girl, whose name was Fantiz Kim violated the terms of service for Facebook. Facebook's algorithmic scanners noted that the image featured a girl without clothes. In the simplest, most literal sense, it had to go from Facebook. The uproar about the deletion was fascinating, as was Facebook's official reaction. First, the decision was simplistic and unconcerned with the context of the photograph. It ignored the historical and news value of the image. And it reminded people of Facebook's power to limit the spread of certain content or alter the meaning of a message posted on Facebook. But lost in the uproar was the fact that Facebook did not remove the image from the world. It still existed in books, on hundreds of websites searchable by Google, and in newspapers and magazines. Critics were eager to call Facebook to account for a clumsy decision, and it was. Clearly, the uproar demonstrated the centrality that Facebook plays in the circulation of images. After the protests and news coverage, Facebook unblocked the site that had featured the image. Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook's chief operating officer, explained the error with a stock phrase, "These are difficult decisions, and we don't always get it right." She was right on both counts. The image of 9-year-old Fantiz Kim carries historical meaning in other contexts, such as in history books. On Facebook, it is now merely a curiosity and a spark to an interrogation of how clumsy Facebook can be when faced with difficult choices at the scale of a global publisher of content from more than 2.2 billion people, which now should read 3 billion people. but the book came out in 2018. Recently, Sontag wrote in 1977, photography has become almost as widely practiced as an amusement as sex and dancing, which means that, like every mass art form, photography is not practiced as an art. Now, she wrote that in 1977. Sontag understood the desire to photograph scenes and events of one's life. Photography is, she wrote, a way of certifying experience, but taking photographs is also a way of refusing it by limiting experience to the search for the photogenic, by converting experience into an image, a souvenir. The very activity of taking pictures is soothing and assuages general feelings of disorientation that are likely to be exacerbated by travel. Now, Sontag passed away in 2004, the year that Facebook was invented, and 3 years before the very first iPhone. By 2021, the quality of cameras on most mobile devices rival that of the best cameras of the 20th century. By 2013, Facebook was receiving more than 350 million photographs every day. By 2015, people around the world uploaded an average of 1.8 billion digital images to all the major social media services of the day. And that adds up to 657 billion photographs per year. It's safe to say that sex and dancing have not proliferated as much as photography has since Sontag noted this trend in 1977. Sontag would have understood the ways that Facebook's visual design triggers us to post images habitually, whether cute or horrifying, awe-inspiring or violent. Like guns and cars, cameras are fantasy machines whose use is addictive, Sontag wrote. And as the parent of a 15-year-old who uses Instagram, I cannot argue. Now, what do we make of that? This book was inspired by Neil Postman, by his work, but mostly by his presence and his personality and his attention. Attention was something to which Neil paid a lot of attention. He was way ahead of people, way ahead of the rest of us by paying attention to attention. I spent a lot of time with Neil in the last few years of his life. I was fortunate enough to work in his department, and I was one of the people who was also fortunate enough to have many long lunches infused with Pinot Grigio, which was his wine of choice, of course. And at the time, I was a bit of a digital enthusiast, as was common in those days, the late 90s, the early aughts. I believed in the potential democratization of culture and the potential democratization of politics through connectivity. I wasn't so different than Mark Zuckerberg, albeit much better educated, and willing to entertain the notion that I might be misguided. And Neil knows how to take advantage of that, right? The slightest bit of doubt or question, and he is in there. And that was the essence of our long lunches and often discussions in his office, where he would provoke me with questions and push at some of the soft spots in my conclusions and my arguments. And he made me so much better as a thinker, and most importantly, as a teacher. Because one of the things I realized as I went through this experience with him is he wasn't just talking to me as a buddy or a colleague, or even as my boss, which he was. He was talking to me as a teacher. He was modeling for me the best possible teaching strategy. And along the way, I happened to pick up a few of his ideas almost against my will, only to find that they popped back into my head and my heart in November 2016, when I was trying to make sense of all that we had just built for ourselves and all we were about to destroy. Because Neil got so much right that I didn't give him credit for at the time. Now, we didn't agree on everything, but now I'm going to read again from the book. The habit of mind that I shared with Neil is one committed to looking at media as an ecosystem, embedded within human relations, and influenced by human relations, also influencing human relations. Neil and I always differed on how much to consider factors beyond the medium in question. As you will see throughout this book, I trace how media systems are shaped by human relations, prejudices, ideologies, and political power, as much as how media shape those phenomena. Neil saw the biases of technology as fairly fixed, clearly identifiable, and powerful. I find such biases contingent on many factors, including how people choose to deploy and alter technologies once they have them in their hands. We have different theories of technology, although they're not that far apart. In my view, there is no distance between technology and culture. Technology is an essential element of and force within culture. Culture forges technologies, and so on. I returned to Amusing Ourselves to Death in November of 2016. And I hadn't read it this century. Amusing Ourselves to Death holds up well after all these years. Now, references to television shows and celebrities of the 1990s sometimes demand a quick search on Wikipedia. And I do note that Neil might have loved Wikipedia, or at least been amused by its pretensions. But the book's central argument, his book's central argument, that the forms of entertainment media and the delivery systems themselves have slowly distorted our habits of mind and steadily atrophied our ability and willingness to engage with each other as responsible citizens, cannot easily be dismissed. The rise and dominance of television in the daily lives of billions of people in the last half of the 20th century, Neil wrote, had rendered it a metamedium, a technology that contained, structured, altered, and delivered many, if not all, previous media forms. Television had become by 1985, as Facebook had become by 2021, an instrument that directs not only our knowledge of the world, but our knowledge of ways of knowing as well. Now, Neil died just weeks before Mark Zuckerberg put together his first prototype for what would become Facebook. It was called FaceMash, and it was a way of ranking the relative attractiveness of his fellow Harvard students. It was an exercise, a tasteless exercise, but it set Mark Zuckerberg on this path to build a metamedium that Neil Postman basically predicted. What Neil saw in television was mostly true of television. It's extremely true of Facebook. Facebook truly does contain all, as McLuhan had written, all the previous media forms. And its implications and its potential for undermining our ability to be citizens collectively in a republic are that much stronger than television, right? The effects are that much stronger than television. We are in worse shape now than we were when Amusing Ourselves to Death came out. We are dazzled by, we are distracted by, we are befuddled by the stream of images that flow across our screens. Now, that's just Facebook. And as I said, Facebook not only contains all media forms, it literally contains the rest of the media ecosystem. Fox News has more viewers on Facebook than it has on cable television. It reaches a bigger audience through Facebook than it does through cable systems. It's actually not that influential if it's just about cable viewers, but its content gets provisioned in tiny chunks that flow well on Facebook, and Facebook groups devoted to its stars or Facebook groups devoted to its pet issues and Fox News' own Facebook site are incredibly influential. And that's one of the reasons that Fox News is the single greatest contributor to content on Facebook in the United States, consistently. And that's not by accident. The people at Fox News got this a long time ago, and they've designed and produced their content to be severable into these tiny bits that flow well on Facebook. And their shows are scripted and prompted to create the Facebook effect, to generate strong emotions Most of those emotions range from indignation to straight up bigotry, but nonetheless, that's what it does. And they win. They win because they know what they're doing. They have understood Facebook. That's just Fox News. Every other publication, every other news outlet, every other entertainment outlet has restructured its content to flow well on Facebook, to pander to algorithmic amplification. Because if you don't travel on Facebook, you do not matter. You might as well be writing about European Union monetary policy. Nobody is, except maybe The Economist, right? Or the Financial Times. Why? Because they need their stuff to find eyeballs. They need to attend to attention. So what's next? I love this photograph. And I hate this photograph. This is the most telling photograph about Facebook I can ever imagine. By the way, this photograph was taken by official Facebook photographers and released by Facebook because they thought it made the company look good. They thought this was an appealing image. Yeah, so this was the day that Mark Zuckerberg announced that Facebook had bought a virtual reality headset called Oculus and was engaging in a new venture to develop virtual reality content. And this is one element of the long game that Mark Zuckerberg would like to pursue, which is to become the operating system of our lives, to become more than a meta medium, to become meta life. Right? So instead of just managing the content that flows across our screens, Facebook, and I must say, and Google, and Apple, and Amazon, and Microsoft, all wish to become the operating system of our lives. This is their 20-year goal. Maybe it's a 30-year goal. And the idea is to help us manage all the little decisions we make in life, like did we set the thermometer right? Did we buy orange juice? Did I walk enough steps today? Right? I got this guy to tell me that I didn't. Actually, I'm in New York, so I did. Right? All of these things are intended to move these systems of surveillance and control and influence and prodding and guidance and marketing out of our little boxes and our little screens and onto our bodies and into our eyeglasses and into our cars and into our homes and ultimately into our food. And I'm not making this up. Like, this stuff is all well documented, and this stuff is largely present tense. This is what they're after. Are we willing to surrender that kind of control for the sake of convenience? So far, the answer is yes. We're more than willing to be able to fire up music in our kitchen without having to press buttons. Somehow that seems like an awesome improvement in our quality of life. And so we've done that by the millions. One of the things we're going to have to do beyond interrogating technologies themselves, one of the things we're going to have to do is get a better sense of what it means to lead a good life. And not just for ourselves individually, but a good life for all of us. How can we collectively live better? And are these decisions we make as consumers and as citizens enhancing the quality of our life, the long-term quality of our life? And I think it starts with our ability to govern ourselves as citizens in a democratic republic. And what we have built through Facebook and through all these other systems that scream at us for attention is cacophony, constant noise. It's as if in our little devices, as we walk through the world with them, staring at them, we're walking through Times Square. It's cacophony. It makes it impossible to think clearly. And it's one of the reasons why, at this point in time, we seem so incapable of addressing the very problems that threaten just about everything. Thank you very much for your time.